Hello, guys. Welcome to another Major Squadcast. This is Shwetabh Singh, playing your host this time. Now, the talk of the town this weekend is the disengagement by PLA and Indian Army in Ladakh, right? And we'd like to discuss more about this. So today we're joined by two experts on this. We're joined by Dr. JabinJacob, who is an associate professor in the Department of International Relations and Governance Studies at Shiv Nadar University, and an adjunct research fellow at the National Maritime Foundation, New Delhi. He was also formerly assistant director at the Institute of Chinese Studies in Delhi. And we're also joined by our own Major Manik Jolly, who is a veteran of the Indian Army. Now, Doctor and Major, I'd like to ask you this. So we know that the Chinese have been asserting their territorial dominance over the past few years, right? What is the Chinese thinking behind this assertion? Doctor?
All right. Thank you, Shwetabh. I think that's an important question to kick things off with. Um, you know, as China has grown in economic power and political weight, one of those things that they've constantly felt that their influence or capacity has been lacking is in the military sphere. And especially since Xi Jinping has come to power as General Secretary of the Communist Party of China, there has been an emphasis on reasserting or strengthening China's military capacity as well as showcasing that military capacity. China's territorial assertiveness is, of course, not something new or something that just started with Xi Jinping. This has been ongoing for a long time. China has been laying the groundwork for its actions in the South China Sea, on the LAC, in the East China Sea with Japan for some time. But it is at a moment where it now believes, especially post the 2008 financial crisis, it perceived that the US was in decline or was now beginning to decline, and therefore its time had come. And under Xi Jinping, that has actually sort of reached a level of dogma for the Chinese. And therefore, they are becoming increasingly assertive because they don't think that there is any opposition from any of the countries in the region, and they feel that the US is less than fully committed to backing its allies. So I think that really is what is behind this several years of now territorial assertiveness by the Chinese.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just to, say the same thing in a little different version, Jacob, what I'd like to say is that from some time, people have been taking one incident after the another as a incident that talks about India and China relations. A little territorial capture here, some trade and commerce issues. But the thing is, like you said, if you look at it, a larger picture, a larger period of time, Chinese assertiveness in the region is not only limited to India per se. They've been doing it South China Sea, they've been doing it Southeast Asia. So it's the overall nature of the CCP and the overall nature of China that they want to portray across the world, that we want to be the global leader in that. And one should not, as far as just quickly coming back to the point, this diplomatic achievement, and I would like to call it achievement, which we have done, making China step back a little, should not be underplayed, but it should not be overvalued also. It could be just a small step in a very large whole movement. And till now, we are yet to hear actually what are Chinese taking in return. Till now we are celebrating that they've gone back from F4 to F8 and they are moving back from the passes and they've taken the armored columns back. But it will take some time, or maybe very sooner than later, that we will come to know that what has China asked for in return. It could be, just allowing all the apps to come back, or more leverage on the trade and commerce imports and exports. So let's just wait before we all start rejoicing actively.
Interesting point, Major and Doctor. Let me ask you this. What really explains Chinese actions along the LAC specifically? How does Chinese perception of India play into that? And, what are the importances of, these mouthpieces, that the unofficial Chinese mouthpieces in the form of Global Times and this GCTN and stuff? How do they play out?
So Well, specifically on the LAC, we all know that this is a problem that has been ongoing for much longer. I mean, the militaries have been involved in this for much longer compared to, say, the South China Sea or any in the East China Sea, for example. So I think people sort of tend to forget that there are two that play at this game, and I think as we've heard recently, it's not as if the transgressions are a one-way street. The Chinese also feel that the Indians are transgressing on their side. And in the last couple of decades, especially at least in the last 15, 20 years, India's own military buildup, or rather infrastructure buildup, pardon me, is been significant along the LAC. So the Chinese have always had this advantage because of terrain and because of their own economic might and superior infrastructure on their side. They always assume that the Indians would be way behind. But even though we are not at the same level of infrastructure buildup as the Chinese, over time, even with whatever we have built, we've been able to patrol areas, run into Chinese patrols, stop them from going further for a very long time. So my guess is that this particular incident or this set of incidents, I mean, it's not just one. I mean, you start from Depsang in 2013, and subsequently, I think the sort of reasoning behind the Chinese assertiveness on the LAC is that, look, we have all this advantage, but we are not able to use it. Let's do something before the Indians, build up strength even more. So I think that is the logic for the Chinese to act at this particular. That explains the timing. I mean, if not now, when? If the Indians also build up infrastructure, then essentially the Chinese are checkmated, and they do not want to give the impression that they have been stalemated or checkmated by the Indians. This sort of image is very important. And also, I think in terms of views, I think it's important to remember that for the Chinese, I mean, yes, there's an impression of India as a fellow third world country, fellow civilization, etc. But India has also been hosting the Dalai Lama for a long time in India, and that is always a concern for the Chinese because their nation building project is not complete. And because the Dalai Lama lives in India, clearly India is seen as an unfriendly power by many sections of the Chinese elite. Another reason why the Chinese think India is unfriendly is because now of the increasing closeness to the United States. So this is something that the Chinese cannot ignore because for them, their primary rival is the United States. So if you are with the United States, that they read it as India being against China. Finally, this point about the Global Times, CGTN. Look, these are propaganda pieces. These are not unofficial. I mean, these are actually official. They are part of the Communist Party infrastructure in the media and propaganda department. So they have a role to play. Now, of course, because the Global Times and CGTN are English language, I mean, CGTN is also available in other languages. I know the idea is to communicate to the outside world what is China's view. So you might not necessarily have to take it seriously all the time on what they say because they're literally sometimes translating what Indian newspapers are saying and then reproducing it and getting people to write about it and so on. But I think you should also still, I mean, there are elements there, especially when scholars write, that you have to take seriously because they might be experts on South Asia or on India. And in China, the scholars have a direct line to the leadership. So leadership often taps expertise on countries, and therefore one needs to sort of pay attention to what they're saying. But you have to match with what they're saying with what they're doing on the ground as well.
Yeah, so I mean, great summary, Jacob, and I'll not repeat whatever you said. It's there and perfectly. I'll just focus a little bit on how I perceive the whole, 9 or 10 months back, the whole issue started. One, I do firmly believe that the building of infrastructure on the border areas by India did lead to them taking a preemptive action on trying to contain it, Indian advance. They did believe that if we try and mobilize our troops and get a little intimidating position across the heights, India will stop because this will be a direct message on why we don't like what you're doing. And as Dr. Jacob said, that what is happening is that they are trying to reshape them, and it is their agenda for this one China entity. And this does include building and development of a lot of border areas through rail connection, through village development, through village defense forces, and all these things. So this was not a random transgression that happened in Leh. It was part of a larger plan. But what they did not expect was how India would react. And one more point I'd like to say, that he also, Jacob, is very right in saying that the two armies, India and China, have been engaged for a much longer time than anything that's happening in South China Sea, or especially the Southeast Asian countries. And that gives us a much deeper understanding of how they will react, or what are their agenda, and what is the famous phrase that goes on, salami slicing, etc. But Chinese still never fail to surprise us, and we should always keep that at the forefront, that always be ready to how to contain them.
Thank you, Doctor and Major, for bringing us all to speed. Now, let me ask you the question, why we're here. Why did the Chinese agree to the latest disengagement process? What do you think prompted them to give up all these heights and, as a lot of people were saying, these advantageous positions that they had captured? Why give up now?
Well, this is a bit of $1 million question, because frankly, the answer to the question of why they actually did it is also still, a lot of it is speculation. I mean, broadly, the infrastructure argument is good, but why now exactly did they do this? So I mean, one could explain it partly in terms of the overall dynamics. Look, like I said at the beginning, Xi Jinping has laid great emphasis on, the military, and making sure that the military in China is ready for combat. He's often used this phrase, "real combat," and that the military is meant to fight wars, and so on. So, and post the military restructuring of the seven theater commands, 7 military regions got converted into 5 theater commands in China. The impression, and I've heard this said often in India, was that well, how can the Chinese, this very large Western theater command, deal with both Russia and India? It's just impossible for them to focus properly on India, where the geography on the LEC itself is so huge, and the area of coverage of the WTC commander is so huge. But that's precisely the sort of issue where the Chinese will say, well, that's a problem that we have to tackle. That's a problem that we have to deal with. We cannot let anybody get away with the impression that we are sitting easy, right? If you look at it carefully, I mean, it's mostly the eastern, the other military regions that are really more important as far as the Chinese are concerned, because the major security threats they perceive are from the United States or from Japan. And the other big issue for them is the reunification of Taiwan with China. So it's a Southern Theater Command or the Eastern Theater Command. Those are the big areas of focus, one would imagine. But here, it's also very important for the Chinese military, for Xi Jinping, I think, perhaps more than the Chinese PLA, to put the PLA through its paces. Test it out, make sure what it is that these guys are good enough for. Why am I spending so much money on the military if the military is not going to fight a war or be capable? Let me see what these guys are up to. So I think that testing out business is very important. In terms of timing, I would say, well, the US was in election year. If the Chinese did something right now, the US did not have time to concentrate or the opportunity to concentrate. So possibly that's one thing. So disengagement right now, I think post Biden, it was, I think the Chinese probably hoped that Biden would be softer or easier on them than the Trump administration. And it was that it would be much more organized and predictable than the Trump administration. But while the Biden administration is committed to changing much of Trump's foreign policy, on China, there's very little change. I think by and large, there is a bipartisan consensus inside the United States that they will continue to see China as a strategic competitor, and that this policy on China wasn't going to change by much. And Biden's phone call with Xi Jinping, just before the disengagement process, or around that time, was a pretty tough call. He was pretty direct with Xi about what exactly the US expected of China. So I think that probably is one part of the pressure. And if social media is to be believed, then there was a great deal of dissatisfaction or disaffection within Chinese ranks, sitting on at these great heights in winter. So probably all of those things. But I'd like to second what Major Jolly just said, that we cannot. I mean, the details are not clear of the disengagement process yet. We don't know when it will be finished. We only thing that we know is that 48 hours after it finishing, we will start addressing other areas. So the disengagement process, what we know of, it's an incomplete process as of now. We cannot be satisfied only with the disengagement from Pangon So. It's other areas of dispute are also there. Currently, all of that is talked about. I mean, the problems are acknowledged, but disengagement from those areas is not yet confirmed. It's still the subject of discussion.
Yeah, that's right. And there is only one part where I actually wanted to stop you and ask to elaborate a little more. That it was a common consensus that while President Trump was in power, that he's more of pro-India, and India was acting all high and mighty because Trump was standing with us. After he lost, there was a lot of speculation on how the Biden administration would act, and China might get even bolder. So what do you have to, what's your opinion that in spite of that, there is a disengagement now, and Chinese did decide to call it a day on this particular deployment?
Well, I wouldn't say Trump was pro-India. Trump is only pro-Trump.
I'm only no.
Yeah.
I'm just
Sure.
I'm asking you to satisfy the common consensus that is built around the whole thing. If you were
Right.
to address room full of people like me who think it is like this versus that, so just like that.
Yeah, so I think primarily, I mean, I wouldn't say that the US is the only factor for the Chinese to agree for the disengagement, but it is probably a big factor. I mean, like I just mentioned, the Biden administration's new China team, they have a China task force. So some of those people are really, may have very strong opinions on China. The Trump administration sort of, had good people, perhaps very few of them. I think Matt Pottinger was one of the best ones that they had in terms of expertise on China. But this Democrat administration has a lot of China experts, and a lot of them are actually sort of a new generation of China experts who have a much more clearer, realist view of China, and do not believe that engagement with China has actually led anywhere. So, the Chinese have a problem on their hands. The two US carrier groups have, already done FONOPs in South China Sea. So all of these are now going to be issues that the Chinese leadership will have to deal with. Plus, as we've just discussed, the Indian army has, even though it has been surprised constantly in terms of what the Chinese have done on the LAC or before that in Doklam, I think once it's understood what's going on, it recovers ground, and it's able to put up a fairly good response to the Chinese. And the Chinese need to deal with this as well. The longer you spend dealing or engaging with India, or sort of India becomes the news, the harder it becomes for the Chinese state to prove that US is their major competitor, and this is a bipolar world in which China is contending with the US. I mean, ordinary Chinese are bound to us. Hey, listen, you lost soldiers in a conflict with the Indians. If you cannot handle India, how on earth are you going to handle the Americans? So at some point, I guess they will also need to walk back from or remove attention from India in order to make themselves look better. It always looks better if you are fighting the bigger, more powerful power, which is the United States, rather than the country that you constantly portray as weak, disorganized, chaotic, which is what the Chinese, Global Times and other outlets in China constantly portray India to be. So I think, these are all possible factors, in addition to possibly, I don't know, whatever else might have taken place on the ground, in Ladakh itself. Now that's, beyond the information that we have at hand right now.
Yeah, and I'll also like to add here that the mindset of Chinese military per se actually took a major change in the 90s. it started moving from just being a land-centric infantry wave after wave kind of army. It was the first Gulf War, and after that was the end of Cold War, which actually made China realize that they have to start improving in terms of modernization, more mobile, dependence on no contact warfare. So all these things they have been developing have turned them into a pretty confident and strong army. Let's say, if, like Jacob said, if it is a bipolar, it is now has turned into a US versus China situation. And if you are one part of the one opposite part of the magnet, and you still keep getting thrashed by somebody you are trying to project as an underdog in South Asia, then it does not look good for you. So it is a very valid point at that why they definitely would have moved back. Adding to that, I'll also like to say that the long-term plan that China has till 2049 and the whole one China entity and global leaders that they want to establish keeps them very focused. It's my personal opinion, they would not like to get sidetracked into handling mess in the neighborhood, getting into unnecessary engagements that works against them not only at global PR, but also keeps a large portion of their troops economy engaged. And also it is an engagement that you have to continuously keep addressing day-to-day basis. So this could be a more pragmatic, this could be a more wise decision that let's make peace in the area. And I'm not saying that they will stop doing what they're doing, because they will not change the basic nature, but still this was a mature decision on the both countries to bring peace and calm into the region. And while I'm saying that, there is one thing which I actually wanted to clarify to a lot of people. While the issue was being made of vacating Kailash range or the area, it is just purely from a military perspective that if the enemy, in this case, that China has moved their troops back and the armored columns have vacated the area, sitting there serves no purpose. Occupying that difficult area and placing your troops there does not serve too much purpose, because there is no immediate threat that you are addressing. The heights were occupied to contain the Chinese into getting into the pass, and once they have gone back, it is business as usual. So I don't think a lot of issues should be made about why some troops are being pulled back. It is part of the disengagement. Both the countries have to comply to it. And secondly, there are some tactical advantages and positions which you take during the battle. But in the overall scope of war, the war as it progresses starts to becoming more and more myopic in its vision. You start with, we will capture Pakistan, but someday you are just fretting over how to take Lahore or a bridge or a pass. So as the war progresses, some things become very critical. But as you move on, progress or come back or something, the things tend to get into just adjust themselves into the overall fabric of the region. So, I saw a lot of noise being made about India is weak because we are vacating and this is a wrong decision. No, it's a great decision. And the military commanders, they know very well that there is absolutely no point putting up a lot of soldiers and troops in middle of nowhere, countering nobody and defending, hill, which nobody's coming to. So just thought I'll clarify this. That's all.
Thank you, Doctor and Major, for bringing us all to speed and telling us your expert opinions on the matter. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. And on that note, I'd like to end the podcast today. Thank you.
And I really like to thank Dr. Jacob here for sparing time. He's one of my favorite experts on the social media on China. And thank you so much for coming here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jolly. Thank you, Shwetabh. Been a pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
sir.
Bye-bye.